What is literature? That is what we are looking at today. The name's Justin van Huyssteen, and I will be covering this question. Very, very basic one. So firstly, let's just go really, really basic here and talk about an actual definition of literature from a dictionary. We're going to specifically look at the Oxford English Dictionary, which is a very, very, authoritative source in terms of definitions. So there are quite a number of different definitions, but this is the one that I have pulled, which is the result or product of literary activity. So remember, this is about literature. So basically it's saying it's what comes out of literary activity, which would be the act of writing. Written works considered collectively. So this is literature as a whole, right? It's not one book. One book is not literature, but one book is part of literature. A body of literary works produced in a particular country or period, right? You could be talking about South African literature. You could be talking about American literature, right? It could be a specific country. It could also be a specific period, right? It could also be like Elizabethan literature. You can talk about specific eras or of a particular genre. You could say horror literature or fantasy literature or whatever. Also, such a body of works as a subject of study or examination, frequently with modifying word specifying the language period. Okay, yeah. So that's the same kind of thing. Yeah, I'm looking at a specific time period or whatever. We've already covered that. But that is basically a very, very standard definition of literature, what literature actually is. So we know what literature is in a very, very denotative sense, right? It's basically just a definition. But a definition is easy, right? So let's look a little bit deeper. Is literature art? Now this is not actually really a debate because it is essentially agreed upon, but the term art is a bit of a difficult one. So while we do know what literature is, where do we actually place it? Now the term art, A-R-T, has both inclusive and exclusive connotations. By that I mean that art is very inclusive of a lot of different things, but also art can often be very exclusive and say, no, this isn't art and this is art. So it's difficult. So for instance, I give here an example. I say a painting in a gallery is art, but so is a child's doodle on a fridge. That is also art. Now, of course, this is also where you get into this debate about, what is art. A lot of people like to sort of say that something that is bad is not art. It is art, it's bad art. You shouldn't really see the term art as having any kind of value attached to it. Art, there's no such thing as good. It's like art doesn't just mean good. Art means just thing made by people, usually for an aesthetic purpose. But it doesn't have to be good. You get a lot of bad art. So literature is generally seen as a form of literary art. But the problem is that the word art has a very pictorial association, right? When you think of the word art, you think of paintings. You might think of sculptures. That's what you often will probably think about when you think about the word art, even though there's lots of different art forms. So this is just a bit of a thing where some people might disagree in terms of the specific terminology used. But regardless of any of these kinds of debates and blah blah blahs, literature does fall under the very, very general umbrella of aesthetics. Right? It's an aesthetic concept. Aesthetics refers to all of the kind of things that could be considered to be art. Aesthetics is also things like, say, fashion entails aesthetics, or architecture entails aesthetics. How you make things look, basically, or sound, or anything like that is aesthetics. So it's a very, very broad term. Now, as you might assume, based on, the name of this channel, that we're a bit focused on literary theory here, so let's consider briefly literature and literary theory. How are these things, related to each other? So obviously, the general object of study of literary theory is literature. Literature is the thing that literary theory studies, but that is a very, very broad generalization because that is just sort of really obvious. It would be like saying, biology is about studying biological things. It's just very, very broad. So as we have specified, literature is very, very broad as a concept, but literature also contains in itself many broad genres. These broad genres, the most commonly cited ones, are things like prose, poetry, drama, These are the commonly cited things that fall under literature. They are all part of literature. However, we could, depending on our argument, sort of say that literature can be extended and also include things like film, comics, video games, and a lot more. Because a lot of the time, literature entails some kind of written aspect, so therefore anything that entails some kind of a written element can be said to be a form of literature in many ways. So it is a very, very broad term. And literary theory is concerned with looking at each of those, and that's why actually literary theory will look at each of those genres. That's why it doesn't really study literature. It will study a specific piece of literature, because just studying literature as a whole is a bit broad, it's a bit big. So you might say, I'm going to study novels, I'm going to study poetry, I'm going to study blah, blah, blah. That is the narrowing of it, so that you can actually grapple with it, so you can actually analyze something. Because if you're just analyzing literature, it would be like saying, I'm going to analyze the world. But what about the world? It's quite big. What parts of it? Just all of it. I'm going to analyze all of it. That just seems a little bit too big, right? Now, the thing is, literature is also part of culture. And as such, it can help us to understand humanity. Basically, literature is something made by humans in culture, in society, and so therefore it is a part of culture. It is an intrinsic part of culture. We create art all the time, and we can understand humans partially through the art that is created by them. Obviously not a perfect representation of exactly what people are, but you will be able to learn more about people through what they create. And this is also why literary theory has a lot to show us. And that's because literary theory is concerned with understanding literature. It is trying to figure out literature and look at it more closely. And yeah, that is pretty much what is literature. It's obviously a very, very brief, easy kind of thing to really to look at in many ways. But if you do have any further questions about this or anything else, please ask in the comments. You're allowed to do that. And also, because we want to see this channel grow and to increase the reach of literary theory in general, please do the liking and the commenting and subscribing and the sharing and all those kind of things. There will be a lot more of these, a lot more. We're going to do tons of videos and hopefully help a lot of people understand literary theory. And so, yeah, that is it for today. So have a great rest of your day and goodbye.